She raised the glass while the fireworks were already exploding outside. The sound came muffled through the windows of her small kitchen. Her hand trembled, not from cold, but from something unnamed. The clock above the stove blinked midnight without ceremony. No one was watching, and somehow that mattered more than she expected. It was only water, clear and still inside the glass. Not because she had nothing stronger in the house, not because she was pretending to be virtuous or brave, but because tonight demanded honesty, not escape, and water was the only thing that felt true enough to hold. She stood there barefoot on the cold tile floor. The room smelled faintly of dish soap and old coffee. A single light buzzed softly above her head. Her reflection stared back from the darkened window. It looked older than she remembered, but also strangely awake. Outside, laughter echoed from neighboring houses. Champagne corks popped like punctuation marks of joy. She felt no jealousy, only distance, as if the world was celebrating on a different frequency, one she had finally decided to stop forcing herself to hear. She whispered no wish, no prayer, no resolution, just a quiet acknowledgement of what had been lost, of what had been endured for far too long. Her chest tightened as memories pressed forward. She let them come, resisting the urge to swallow them down. The glass touched her lips, cool and grounding. She drank slowly, deliberately, without flinching. This was not a punishment, she reminded herself. It was a boundary drawn for the first time, a line between who she had been and who she might become. When the glass emptied, nothing magical happened. The room remained the same, the noise outside unchanged, but something inside her shifted, almost imperceptibly, like a door closing softly instead of slamming shut. And she knew there would be no going back untouched. She had attended countless celebrations like this before, rooms full of smiles she learned to mirror perfectly, glasses raised high while her thoughts stayed low and hidden. She knew how to laugh at the right moments, how to disappear without ever leaving the room. She remembered the dinners where she nodded instead of speaking, the holidays where silence felt safer than truth, the relationships built on endurance, not desire. She stayed because staying was expected of her, and leaving always felt like a failure she could not afford. There were years when she confused survival with strength. She wore exhaustion like a badge of honor, told herself this was just how life worked. Pain became routine, almost comforting in its familiarity. At least pain asked nothing new of her. Every celebration had demanded a version of herself, the agreeable woman, the reliable one, the quiet listener, the one who never made things uncomfortable. She learned early that being easy kept her included, even when inclusion felt painfully empty. That night, standing alone, the truth surfaced gently. She had been present everywhere but within herself. Her absence had gone unnoticed for decades, even by the people who claimed to know her best, especially by them. She felt grief rise, slow and heavy, not for people she lost, but for herself, for the parts she abandoned to keep the peace, for the voice she trained herself not to hear. The silence suddenly felt louder than any party ever had, and in that quiet, she wondered something dangerous. What if her life had never required so much sacrifice? What if she had volunteered herself away piece by piece? The question lingered without offering comfort, but once asked, it refused to leave her alone. The hardest part was that no one noticed her change. There was no announcement, no dramatic goodbye. No one clinked glasses to honor her resolve. The world moved forward, oblivious and loud, and her decision remained invisible, even to herself at times. She had expected relief to arrive immediately, a sense of freedom, or at least lightness. Instead, there was a strange weight in her chest, as if she had set something down, and now missed its heaviness. Letting go felt unfamiliar, almost disorienting. The habits she released had shaped her days. They filled empty hours and numbed restless thoughts. Without them, time stretched awkwardly before her. She did not know how to occupy herself honestly. Stillness demanded more courage than distraction ever had. She realized how often she waited for permission, for someone to validate her pain or bless her choices. But this decision came without witnesses. No approval softened the fear that followed it. She was alone with her resolve, fully and finally. That loneliness tested her more than she anticipated. Not the absence of people, but of reassurance. There was no script for what came next, no familiar role to fall back into, just her own voice, uncertain and untrained. She questioned herself in the quiet hours, wondered if she was overreacting, being dramatic. Old doubts resurfaced, well practiced and persuasive. They reminded her how much easier it was to endure, how dangerous it was to want more. Yet beneath the doubt, something steadier remained, a knowing she could not fully explain. This choice, however lonely, felt aligned, not joyful, not triumphant, but necessary, and necessity, she sensed, would demand a price. She began to notice how quickly she reached for escape, not just drinks, but conversations, noise, obligation, anything to stay ahead of her own thoughts. Feeling had always seemed like an inconvenience. Now it stood directly in her path. Memories surfaced without warning or mercy. Words spoken years ago replayed with new clarity. Moments she dismissed as small revealed deeper wounds. She saw patterns she once defended fiercely. Recognition hurt more than ignorance ever had. There were nights she sat on the edge of her bed, hands folded, breathing shallow, eyes fixed on nothing. The urge to numb herself rose like a reflex. Her body remembered comfort even when her mind resisted. She learned how strong old instincts could be. She realized she had confused coping with healing. Survival strategies had become permanent residences. They kept her functional but profoundly disconnected. Feeling was not the enemy she imagined. Avoidance had simply delayed the inevitable reckoning. As emotions surfaced, she resisted judging them. No labeling, no rushing to fix or explain. She let sadness exist without justification. Let anger breathe without turning it inward. This permission felt radical, almost rebellious. Some feelings stayed longer than she expected. They demanded patience. She was still learning. She discovered that pain did not destroy her. It moved through her when she allowed it space, and each wave left her slightly more grounded. Still, fear lingered quietly in the background. What if this openness never led to relief? What if feeling everything broke something inside her? She had no proof it would get easier, only the faint sense that she could no longer turn away. The first morning of the new year arrived without ceremony. Sunlight crept in through the blinds, unremarkable and pale. No revelation greeted her, no renewed sense of self. Just the ordinary weight of waking up, and the realization that change did not pause life. She moved through the morning slowly and deliberately. Every action felt newly conscious, almost fragile. There was no familiar comfort to lean on. Her routines had lost their protective armor. Even coffee tasted different in the quiet. Fear settled in as the day unfolded. Not fear of failing, but of continuing. She wondered who she would be now, without the habits that defined her reactions, without the roles that once gave her shape. The future felt vast and undefined, too open to be reassuring. She had always known how to endure, but she had never learned how to choose. Choice felt heavier than any burden she carried before. She questioned whether courage could sustain her, whether resolve survived repetition and fatigue. It was easier to decide once than to decide daily. Morning demanded accountability, the night had not, and she felt unprepared for its honesty. Yet beneath the fear, something unexpected stirred, a subtle steadiness she did not recognize. Not confidence, not hope, but willingness, a quiet agreement to face the day awake, to meet herself without armor or anesthesia. As evening approached, she understood one thing clearly. This path would not reward her quickly. There would be no applause for her restraint, but something essential had already begun, and whatever came next would require her full presence. The morning light entered her kitchen without asking permission. It revealed the same table, the same chair, the same quiet walls. Nothing around her reflected the internal shift she felt. The absence of ceremony made the moment strangely heavier. Change, she realized, did not announce itself with kindness. She moved through the morning as if learning her body again. Each movement felt deliberate, almost fragile in its awareness. There was no familiar haze to soften the edges of thought. Her mind felt sharp, alert, and uncomfortably present. Sobriety was not clarity yet, only exposure. She noticed how silence expanded when unfilled. No background noise to blur her reflections. No excuses to rush past discomfort. Time stretched longer than she remembered. Minutes demanded to be lived instead of skipped. Her coffee cooled untouched as thoughts gathered. Questions she had postponed lined up patiently. What would she do when cravings returned? Who would she be without her old escapes? She had answers for none of it. The ordinary world continued without pause. Cars passed, neighbors waved, life unfolded indifferently. She felt both part of it and strangely apart. awake in a way that felt almost too intimate, as if she had removed a layer of protection. Fear crept in quietly, without drama. Not panic, but a low, steady uncertainty. Could she maintain this awareness every day? Could she carry herself without softening the weight? The questions stayed with her like shadows. Still, when the day ended, she noticed something subtle. She had stayed present through every uncomfortable moment. Nothing catastrophic had happened because she felt deeply the world had not collapsed under her honesty. And that realization stayed with her into the night. It did not take long for people to sense the difference, not because she announced it, but because she moved differently. She listened longer before responding. She declined invitations without elaborate explanations. Her absence from old rituals unsettled familiar rhythms. Friends asked questions disguised as jokes. Family members tilted their heads with concern. She recognized the discomfort behind their curiosity. Change, even quiet change, disturbed expectations, especially when it removed her from predictable roles. She felt the pull to reassure them, to soften her boundaries for their comfort. Old instincts urged her to explain herself away, to make her transformation less inconvenient. She felt how deeply that reflex was ingrained. Saying less required more strength than she expected. Each pause felt like standing exposed. She was unused to letting silence speak for her, used to filling gaps before anyone noticed discomfort. Now she let the space remain unresolved. Some reacted with confusion, others with distance. A few responded with subtle disappointment. She absorbed their reactions without absorbing the blame, learning that not every response required correction. This restraint felt unnatural, but grounding. At times, loneliness sharpened unexpectedly, not because she lacked company, but because she was no longer performing familiarity. Authenticity reduced noise, but also reduced access. She began to see which connections depended on her silence. That realization stayed with her uneasily, not as anger, but as information. She understood that growth would rearrange relationships, and that not everyone would follow her forward. The knowing hurt, but it also clarified her path. The temptation did not arrive loudly or dramatically. It slipped in disguised as nostalgia, as a memory of ease rather than pain. She remembered how simple it felt to escape, how quickly discomfort used to dissolve. One evening, fatigue lowered her defenses. The day had demanded more than she anticipated. Old habits whispered promises of relief. Not joy, not happiness, just rest. And rest felt dangerously appealing. Her body remembered comfort before consequences. Muscle memory guided her thoughts automatically. She felt how easy it would be to return. No one would punish her for it. No rule existed except the one she made herself. She stood still, allowing the craving to speak, not fighting it, not feeding it, listening to what it truly asked for. It was not escape she wanted. It was tenderness she had denied herself. That recognition changed something inside her. She saw the craving as a signal, not a failure, a request for care rather than indulgence. This shift softened her resistance. Compassion replaced control. She chose a different kind of relief. Not dramatic, not impressive, a warm shower, slow breathing, quiet music. The urge passed without spectacle, leaving behind a fragile sense of self-trust. That night, she slept deeply but thoughtfully, aware that temptation would return, but also aware she had met it honestly. She did not need to conquer it. She only needed to understand it. Without distraction, solitude felt sharper, not empty, but intensely present. Her emotions echoed louder in the quiet. There was nowhere to redirect attention. Loneliness demanded acknowledgement rather than avoidance. She realized how often she had confused company with connection, noise with intimacy, distraction with belonging. Alone now, she met herself fully, and the meeting felt overwhelming at first. Memories surfaced without invitation. Conversations she never finished replayed internally. Grief she postponed returned patiently. She did not push it away this time. She allowed it to sit beside her. There were evenings she cried without narrative. No clear reason, no single cause, just accumulated emotion releasing slowly. She learned that tears did not weaken her. They softened something long hardened inside. Loneliness stopped feeling like punishment. It became a mirror instead, reflecting what she needed rather than lacked. She began to see herself more clearly, not as broken, but unfinished. This awareness changed how she breathed, how she occupied space, how she listened to her own thoughts. Solitude became less threatening, It turned into a classroom rather than a void. Still, uncertainty lingered. Growth felt slow and unglamorous. No dramatic breakthrough marked her days, only consistent presence and the quiet understanding that something was forming. The moment arrived without preparation, a request she would have accepted automatically before. Her body responded before her words did. A tightening in her chest, a pause. She recognized the signal immediately. She took a breath she once would have skipped, allowed the silence to stretch uncomfortably. Then she said no, simply, calmly, without explanation. The word felt unfamiliar but solid. There was no confrontation, no dramatic fallout, just a subtle shift in the room. She noticed how quickly guilt tried to follow. Old training resurfacing automatically. She let the feeling pass without obedience. That no echoed internally longer than externally. It rearranged something foundational. She felt taller without standing, lighter without celebration. Respect settled quietly into her posture. She understood the significance immediately, not because it was large, but because it was aligned. For once, her actions matched her inner truth. The harmony felt profound. This small decision changed how she saw herself, not as someone attempting change, but as someone practicing it. Daily, imperfectly, honestly. The identity shift mattered more than the act. As the day ended, she carried a new awareness. Boundaries were not walls, they were bridges to self-trust, and she sensed that this was only the beginning. Something deeper was preparing to emerge. The pain did not arrive suddenly or dramatically. It unfolded slowly, like a long-delayed season. She noticed it in quiet moments, in pauses between tasks, a heaviness that asked not to be solved, only to be fully acknowledged. For years, she had outrun this feeling with efficiency. Responsibilities gave her speed and purpose. Distractions gave her temporary relief. Now, there was nowhere left to run, and pain stood patiently in her path. She understood that healing required presence, not strength, not positivity, not explanation. Presence meant staying even when it hurt, letting discomfort speak without interruption, trusting that pain had something honest to reveal. Grief surfaced for lives she never lived, for choices made out of fear instead of truth, for versions of herself she abandoned quietly. This grief did not accuse her. It simply asked to be mourned. There were moments she wished for numbness again, for the old relief of not feeling so deeply, but she recognized the cost immediately. Numbness demanded her future as payment, and she was no longer willing to pay. As days passed, the pain shifted shape. It softened around the edges. It no longer dominated every thought. Feeling fully did not destroy her. It slowly returned her to herself. She realized something essential in this process. Pain was not punishment for her past. It was proof of her presence now. And presence, though uncomfortable, meant life. A life she was finally participating in. Forgiveness arrived without warning or announcement. Not as a dramatic release, but as exhaustion. She grew tired of carrying old expectations. Tired of waiting for words that would never come. Tired of rehearsing conversations long past. She saw clearly how forgiveness had been misunderstood. Not a gift to others. Not a declaration of innocence, but a decision to stop reopening wounds. A boundary placed gently around her own heart. There were no apologies offered. No explanations that justified the damage done. No recognition of her quiet endurance. And strangely, she no longer needed them. Their absence lost its power over her. Forgiving did not erase memory. It changed how memory lived inside her. The past no longer dictated her emotional posture. It became information instead of identity. A chapter, not the entire story. She released the fantasy of closure through others, understanding that some doors remain unfinished, not because she failed, but because closure was never theirs to give. This truth settled slowly, but firmly. With forgiveness came unexpected lightness, not joy exactly, but spaciousness, room for new thoughts to form, room for self-respect to deepen, room for a future unburdened by old debts. She noticed how differently she breathed now, how her body softened in familiar situations. Forgiveness did not make her forget, it made her free, and freedom felt quieter than she imagined. One morning, she caught her reflection unexpectedly, not in preparation, but in passing. And for the first time, she did not flinch. The woman looking back felt recognizable. Not perfect, but present. She studied the lines on her face gently. They no longer read as failures. They told stories of endurance and survival, of years spent holding more than she admitted. There was dignity in that acknowledgement. Shame had once narrated her reflection, pointing out what should have been different, what she should have known sooner. Now that voice had softened, replaced by something closer to understanding. She saw strength where she once saw weakness, courage where she once saw hesitation, resilience where she once saw compromise. Her reflection no longer demanded justification. It offered recognition instead. This shift changed how she moved through the world. Her posture straightened without intention. Her gaze met others more steadily. She did not shrink to be accepted. She occupied space with quiet confidence. The mirror became a place of truth, not judgment, not criticism, a reminder of where she had been and where she had chosen to go. Choice, she realized, was her greatest transformation. She understood then that healing was visible, not as perfection, but as peace. The mirror no longer accused her of delay. It reflected readiness, and readiness felt like power. Months later, another evening arrived quietly. No fireworks, no calendar significance, just a moment that felt intentional. She stood again in her kitchen, a glass in her hand. Once more, she poured water, clear, simple, unadorned. The gesture carried memory now, but also meaning transformed by time. This was no longer a farewell. She raised the glass without trembling, her body steady, her breath slow. This time, the room felt inhabited. She was fully there with herself. Nothing needed to be escaped. She drank with gratitude rather than resolve, for clarity earned through discomfort, for boundaries practiced daily, for the courage to remain awake, for the woman she had become. The water tasted different than before, not because it changed, but because her relationship to herself had shifted, and meaning followed transformation. She felt no need to explain this ritual. It belonged to her alone, a private acknowledgement of commitment, not to perfection, but to presence. As she set the empty glass down, she smiled softly, not in celebration, but recognition. This moment was complete as it was, and for the first time, completion felt internal, unshakable, and sufficient. Looking back, she saw how quietly everything changed. No dramatic turning point marked the journey, only consistent, honest choices made daily. The accumulation of presence over avoidance, the courage to stay with herself. She had not become fearless. Fear still visited her from time to time, but it no longer dictated her decisions. She listened without surrendering control. Fear became a signal, not a ruler. The greatest transformation was not visible. It lived in how she treated herself, with patience instead of criticism, with boundaries instead of endurance, with compassion instead of neglect. She understood now what rebadging truly meant, not starting over as someone else, but returning to who she had always been, before the world taught her to disappear, before survival replaced truth. This understanding settled deeply into her life, guiding decisions both small and significant. She trusted herself in ways she never had before. Trust replaced urgency. Presence replaced escape. The world around her continued unchanged. Celebrations still happened elsewhere. Noise still existed beyond her walls, but she no longer felt excluded from herself. That inclusion changed everything. And if someone asked what happened that year, she might not mention the glass of water. She would simply say she stayed. She stopped abandoning herself. And that choice, she knew, was forever.